Hey everybody, it's T here. I'm by myself today. I just wanted to address some questions about hydration I've been getting lately from other folks with an ostomy who are either starting out with cycling or running or doing other sports, and maybe now that it's summer and getting a little bit hotter, have been noticing issues with hydration. Just some background, I'm a competitive cyclist. I compete in primarily road, track, and cyclocross. I dabble in a little bit of mountain, but I wouldn't really call myself a mountain biker. I race in women's UCI races and domestic elite races, and race in hot weather because that's what we do. So I've had quite a bit of experience with trial and error and figuring out what works and what doesn't, and have learned the hard way myself, either through results that I didn't like by improper preparation or flat out medical emergencies. So I wanted to share what I've learned so you don't have to repeat it. At this point, I still sometimes have some issues. I recently had a heat emergency at a race on a very hot day through pure fault of my own because I didn't follow my own rules of preparation and advice. And after we talk about hydration, I'll tell you more about what I did to set myself up for a really bad time a couple weeks ago too. Other things, I'm a practicing PA. That's for folks who don't have that medical model in their country. It's a mid-level practitioner. It's sort of like a European model of general practitioner medical school. I went to the Yale School of Medicine for a 2.5-year program. I currently work in transplant surgery, and basically I have some medical background as well. I treat patients with electrolyte abnormalities in my daily career as well. So let's start with just the basics of, you'll have to forgive my handwriting. So what's an electrolyte? Electrolytes are small particles. They are invisible. They are primarily, in this case, we were worried about sodium, potassium, and we're worried about magnesium to some extent. But sodium and potassium are big too. Magnesium, we'll call that 3. Okay. We're also worried about, of course, volume. So that's water. We understand that water is one of the essential components of hydration, and electrolytes are the other. You cannot be hydrated without having both. You can have extremely poor hydration by having too much water or too much electrolyte in the absence of water. So let's talk about how water and electrolytes interact, because they really are inseparable. All water, whether it's from a tap or bottled water or in a mix with an electrolyte solution, does have some amount of electrolytes. There is no such thing as water in the complete absence of electrolytes unless you are doing something really wild, like evaporation, distilling, and extreme purification processes. So let's go back to elementary school. Most of you probably remember this from an elementary school textbook or an experiment. We're going to look at this little picture here. So we see my terrible drawing here. This is supposed to be a beaker. This is filled with water. And this line here is we have a cheesecloth or some other semi-permeable membrane that allows water to pass through. Okay, so what we have is, it's a relatively tight membrane, but it allows water to freely pass between. With equal electrolytes on both sides, we have equal water. Okay, now you probably remember in grade school, if we shake some salt into one side of this divided beaker or tank, we are adding solutes. Now, water always wants to be equal. What does that mean? It means if I start taking up more space on this side with things that aren't water, we actually end up pulling more water in, because there is trace amount of salt on this side, there is more salt on this side. The water always wants to maintain the same ratio. So what does this mean for human physiology? We remember that grade school experiment. What it means is that when we add electrolytes to our bloodstream, we maintain our ability to keep fluid inside of our bloodstream. When we have extremely low solutes or electrolytes in our bloodstream, we tend to have our water extravasate. What does that mean? It means it goes into your tissues outside of your bloodstream and it makes you puffy. So maybe you've seen after an event where you've sweat a lot, or maybe you've even seen in an elderly relative, they become extremely edematous. They have a lot of free water in their extremities. It's because they have an imbalance between the solute in their vascular space and in their extravascular space. Our goal as athletes is to have water inside our vessels where our body can access it. That's not to say we don't need water outside of our vessels. Of course, our vessels are perfusing our organs, but our goal is to be able to effectively bring water from our gut into our blood vessels and then into our capillary bed, where it can perfuse our muscles, our organs, and can work to cool us when we sweat. So we need electrolytes first and foremost to help us move water into our vascular space and keep it there where it's most useful. We also need electrolytes to help our muscles function. And when I say muscles, I also mean our intestinal muscles, our GI function, but also our striated muscles, which are the muscles we use for activities. When you don't have enough electrolyte to help drive the metabolic processes of exercise, we end up with cramps as a product of dehydration. So a little bit tricky, but that's the basics of fluid balance and electrolytes. You cannot have one without the other and have your body function. We need both volume and electrolytes to maintain proper hydration and function. So here, you can see we have water is volume, and also if we look closely, we see that sodium, salt, that is our big puller of water into our vascular space. So sodium is also tied to volume. Potassium is also tied to volume. Magnesium is also tied to volume. Okay? We cannot have hydration without all of the above. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how we lose electrolytes. We have primary methods of loss of electrolytes for each different electrolyte. Sodium is probably the obvious one. If you're a salty sweater, especially, you've probably seen salt residue on your helmet or your cycling jersey or your running shirt. We lose salt through sweat as our primary method of loss. Potassium is actually, there are three main ways we lose potassium. Primary, urine or stool. So urine, if you have impaired renal function that's related to your urostomy, you may have noticed that you have potassium imbalances that are either high or low, depending on both medications you're on and your own physiology. If that is the case, I, at this point, would strongly recommend that you see a nutritionist who can follow your individual lab results, and please do not follow any of the advice below or to follow. If you have an ileostomy or a colostomy, especially one that is higher or more active, you will find that you lose potassium a lot faster because our intestinal transit time is more rapid and there is less time for reabsorption in the large bowel. So the more you poop, whether or not you have an ileostomy, a colostomy, or a J pouch, or none of the above, the more potassium you lose. If you don't poop, you don't lose as much potassium. So that also means on very high output days, if you're finding your output is extremely watery, you should be extremely careful of your potassium intake, regardless of whether you're exercising or not. You are 100% losing potassium at a higher than normal rate. That is one of the primary ways we lose potassium. The other way we lose potassium is actually tied to the way we lose sodium. Unfortunately, when our bodies become dehydrated, one of the ways, and by dehydrated I mean volume drops, one of the ways that our kidneys helps us to conserve that volume in our blood vessels is it decreases our urine output. One of the ways it regulates our urine output is through sodium-potassium pumps and channels in our kidneys. And our bodies conserve sodium, which we remember is our major puller of volume, at the expense of potassium. So if you can imagine a little flywheel inside your kidney that when your body says, oh no, I'm getting dehydrated, sets off this flywheel and it starts spinning all of the sodium that helps us make urine back into your bloodstream. And while it's spinning sodium back into your bloodstream, it's spitting out potassium. It's paying that toll with potassium. So we can actually set off a cycle of increased dehydration and electrolyte emergency just by heading down that path of starting to get dehydrated. Some of you have probably already noticed you start to get dehydrated and all of a sudden it's like everything just implodes. It gets so much worse. You're in the hospital, you need IV fluids. That's part of the reason why. So our goal should be, instead of playing catch up, to prevent dehydration states entirely. So how do we prevent dehydration? So there have been a lot of questions from people recently about when should I start hydrating, or how much should I hydrate for this event, or what should I use to hydrate? The answer to when should I start hydrating is every day. all the time, every single day. If you have an ileostomy especially, or a colostomy, or really any gastrointestinal diversion, you are more at risk of dehydration, both volume and electrolyte status, than people who do not. So for daily hydration, if it is hot especially, you will be sweating to maintain your body temperature. Regardless, it is wise if you have an intestinal diversion, remember we are losing more potassium, to use a low calorie or no calorie electrolyte solution with your daily water intake. Now, if you are completely sedentary and are not sweating, are in a climate controlled environment, then you are likely able to take in enough sodium and potassium just through your daily food intake. If that is you, then you do not need an electrolyte solution. If you are mild to moderately or very active, then you should upregulate your electrolyte intake. Some things that I use on a daily basis to maintain my hydration. Well, one, I carry around a water bottle pretty much all the time. I drink a lot of water, and I use electrolyte mix for probably, depending on how hot it is and depending on where I am in my training cycle, all or at least half of my daily intake. What do I like to use? I like to keep low to no calorie hydration mixes on hand. I jump around between products. I am sponsored by one hydration manufacturer, but I do have a handful of other tools in my toolbox as well. So right now I'm really hooked on Noon. This is a electrolyte tablet that you can put into water. It is 0 calorie, and it basically has everything you really need. So Noon, this is watermelon flavor. They're not terrible on price. I highly recommend these. You drop one tablet into 16 ounces of water, boost your electrolyte intake. 0 calories. For daily hydration, I also like Scratch Labs. I should caveat this with the fact that I am currently sponsored by Scratch, which is awesome because this is probably my favorite brand and it has saved my life many times over. And I'm not just saying that because I'm sponsored by them. They actually saved my life on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. This stuff does have 25 calories per serving, which, if you're including that into your daily calorie counts and intake, is not a big deal. It's delicious, it's raspberry, it's awesome. This is sort of my more fun daily hydration mix. But I don't carry it around with me to work because it's a little harder than the tablet form. Okay, so that's daily hydration. So if you're hydrating on that kind of basis, cheers, daily, you should never be in a state where you are saying, holy cow, I am so dehydrated, I've got to catch up before I do my big run on the weekend, my big ride with my club team, or my race, because your baseline hydration status is good. However, there will be days when you're going out for a 4-6 hour ride, or you're going to go do an hour criterium that is extremely high intensity, or even shorter events where the temperature is high, the humidity is high, you are going to need to take on a lot more water and solute than you can possibly do during that time. So for that situation, and only that situation, now we're not talking about preparing for average training. This is not talking about preparing for a Zumba class. In fact, consuming pre-hydration mix prior to low intensity average exercise could be extremely dangerous. For high intensity, high heat situations only, I like to start the night before the event and then again in the morning with pre-hydration mix. I have two products I really like. One is made by a company called Osmo. Let's see if I can get this to actually pick up. They actually make a gender-specific line of products. This is the women's pre-hydration mix. They also make an active hydration mix as well. This is extremely high in salt. It is a bit of an acquired taste. I won't lie about that. But it really works. And the goal of that high salt content is really to bring as much fluid intravascularly as possible. Scratch Labs, the same company that saved my life, this is one of the products that saves my life on a weekly basis, sometimes even multiple times a week, depending on the temperature. Scratch Labs puts a huge warning on this box that says, this is only for intense exercise because there is so much salt in this, it could put you in medical danger. If you have a heart condition, you should not use this product. It could volume overload you by bringing too much fluid into your vascular space. Scratch Labs advises using this about an hour to 45 minutes prior to your high intensity race. I use this off-label the night before as well, because I find that as an ostomate, putting about half of this packet into a water bottle and starting that pre-hydration process earlier really helps bring my volume status up to a more normal starting place for the morning when I use a full packet prior to my event, as per Scratch Labs recommendations. That is off-label use. I cannot recommend that you do that unless you experiment with this on your own. I am in no way providing medical advice for you. You should talk to your doctor if you are at all uncertain about this. And I recommend with any new product, especially one that has warnings on its box, that you start small. So perhaps on a high heat, high intensity training day, try a smaller amount of this and see how you do with that versus a whole packet in a water bottle, okay? But this is one of the most useful tools in my toolbox. I basically can't race without that at this point for anything that is high intensity or high heat. That's cyclocross, track, criteriums, that's always in my bag. And I don't know what I would do without it. So that's pre-hydration. Okay, so now we're going to talk about during hydration. When I say during, I mean during your workout or during your race. So there's many ways to quantify what a workout or what a race is. We can call it short, long, we can call it easy or intense. So I like to think of those as axes. So short is on one end, long is on the other, and there's a whole continuum in between. Now, on this axis, we have low intensity. This is your easy recovery ride. You're barely even working, to the most intense race you can possibly manage, or sometimes even your most intense training day will be even harder than that race. So if we go into the easy short axis, okay, that's this intersection over here. So short and easy. So short and easy, you can probably just use water if you are adequately hydrated, because you're not going to be sweating a lot. You're not going to lose a lot of volume. Okay. Now, if we go to the opposite end of the spectrum, long and hard, or just plain hard, okay, you're going to need a lot more volume and solute. How much? You're really going to have to play with that by yourself. Generally, as a rule, for road rides or races, I would recommend no less than 1 water bottle per hour of active moving time. And for a hard effort or race, over an hour, so that's including warm-up, I would recommend using something that has both electrolytes and sugar in it. Why sugar? Because one, glucose helps move electrolytes from your gut into your bloodstream, but also you need to fuel your body. I'm not going to talk a lot about fueling right now, but glucose is an important tool in our toolbox. So this is a continuum. And there's a lot of products out there that are marketed as exercise mixes, and you're just going to have to figure out what works for you. You know, we've got the big guns on one side and the little guns on the other side. So as far as little guns, you've got water or just your daily mix. If that's what you're just going for a short ride, using daily mix is totally fine. Short and easy. Other short and easy mixes, if you want to go to just like a CVS or other convenience store, low calorie, no calorie, right off the shelf mix, cheap and easy. This is $1 at the grocery store. It's totally fine. I would use something like this, up to an hour and a half of easy to moderate workout and call that it. We're talking about not extreme conditions, not high heat days. Another thing I like that's a little bit cheaper than a lot of stuff that's marketed for sports is actually, you've probably seen this on the shelf. It's Emergency. It's marketed usually in health supplement stores. It comes in little packets. But if you look at the information on the back of this, it actually has a lot of potassium. The thing it has a lot less of is sodium. But I like this for easy to moderate, 1 hour, 1 hour and a half, maybe even creeping up to 2 hours. Not high heat conditions, not high intensity. This is a lot cheaper to get a box of these and keep that around in your arsenal for, your easier days. Okay. Now we're getting into what about your harder rides, your club rides where you don't want to end up having a problem and getting dropped. So this is, again, Scratch Labs. This is their exercise mix. So higher calorie, it's 40 calories per serving, which is actually still incredibly low, but it has higher potassium and sodium content in it for exercise. So this is something I would put in my water bottles for, club ride, 3, 4 hours, 5 hours, even shorter, maybe even 2 hours if it was going to be a little lively. This can be a fast ride. This can be a moderate ride. It's all about what you perceive it to be. This is a staple. So this is where the majority of rides fall in here. Race efforts. If I'm going to be going fast, hard, really pushing limits, I want every single time I put the water bottle to my mouth to be the maximum amount of hydration with electrolytes as well as volume, and also glucose as I can manage. So that's when I run into using something like Roctane, which, if it sounds like jet fuel, it pretty much is. This is 100% not for easy efforts. This is not for your club ride. This is for race efforts. This is high intensity rides where that if you don't fuel it right, you're going to end up popped off the back. You'll see a lot of anything that's marketed towards intensity or racing is going to fall in that category. Okay, so now we've finished our ride and we're recovering. So post-ride, recovery is incredibly important. And starting that as soon as you get off the bike makes a huge difference. It's really time critical. I can't emphasize that enough. So right off the bike, depending on what the effort is, I like to go either straight back to, if it's high intensity, high heat, high humidity, I know I've lost huge amounts of volume. I am drenched in sweat, or I see the salt streaks on my face. My hair is crunchy with salt. My speed suit has salt streaks on it. I go straight back to this. This is a big rescue. This is that Scratch Labs hyperhydration mix. Again, that's off-label use, but if you need the salt fast, this is quick, portable. You can stick it in your bag, have it right away. Go straight to that. Okay. Otherwise, I carry these around too. This is Scratch Labs Rescue Mix. This is actually a good part of your medicine cabinet just for being a person with an ostomy. I use these actually more than racing, just when I'm feeling like my output is high, I'm not feeling quite right, I know I'm dehydrated. These are a huge hit of electrolytes. You can mix with some water and they're pretty tasty. So I actually highly recommend these just as basic emergency kit supplies for people with an ostomy. But these are also great for recovery, for those rides or races where you come back and you know you're gonna have a problem and you don't wanna end up in the ER. Go to this and go to this fast. For when you can stomach it after you've gotten some volume in, or as an adjunct to those things, I have a couple other favorites. Again, I really like using stuff that's off the kitchen shelf and less specialty product, because I think it's, one, it's cheaper, it's more sustainable, and it's oftentimes nice to have real food. So what has a huge amount of sodium and potassium? V8. So this stuff is like, it's insane. I'm looking at the back of this. It has 640 milligrams of sodium and 460 milligrams of potassium per serving. That's huge. So I actually, oftentimes when I come back from a really hot, really hard ride or race, will hit this like straight out of the bottle. Or pick it up at a convenience store on your ride. It's awesome. See if it works for you. Coconut water is fine. It's a little pricey. You could get a bottle of this for the same price as like a little bottle of coconut water. I'd go for this. This has way more sodium and potassium in it. And it's probably gonna make you feel a lot better in the long run. Other sort of weird, cheap and easy stuff. You're really, really dehydrated when pickle juice suddenly tastes really good. When pickle juice tastes good, it's because your body is telling your brain you desperately need that sodium content. This is a ton of sodium in the pickle juice. It also has vinegar, which helps your body to buffer acid after exercise. I know it sounds crazy, but if you're really, really tanked from a ride, try drinking some pickle juice. Not sweet pickle juice, but real pickle juice. And then lots of water and electrolytes with it. Okay. So I said I was going to tell you guys about how I really screwed up my hydration a couple weeks ago. So I hydrate daily, but I also work in a hospital where it's very dry, and sometimes I don't get to choose when I get to my water bottle because I'm taking care of patients who are very sick. So I worked 3 days in a row, 13-hour shifts plus commute, 18-hour days, and had some really busy shifts. So I was probably a little bit dehydrated coming into it, and was really, really tired because I was busy during work. So I came home from my third shift and I was so tired, I mixed up one of my bottles to start pre-hydrating, and I fell asleep before I finished up. So I woke up the next morning with the alarm to pack the car and go to the race. and I was still just really tired. And my fiance drove the car to the race, and I fell asleep in the car. I woke up about an hour into the 3.5 hour drive. We stopped. I was going to take a turn driving. I drank some coffee. So we know coffee is a diuretic. And I started peeing a lot because I drank coffee. So I think at that point I reassured myself, because my pee was clear because I was peeing so much, I wasn't as dehydrated as I was. Now, this was a very hot day. We're talking, the tar on the concrete starting to melt hot. Extremely hot conditions criterium in the midday sun. Very fast race. And before we got to the race, I did finish my 1 water bottle with the pre-hydration mix, but I was still, when we added it up, the bottle in the morning, that's 1 water bottle. I missed the bottle before, and we were at that point running a little bit late. So as I was warming up in the high heat, I didn't hydrate as much as I should have during an hour of warm up. I should have drank a whole other water bottle and probably also more pre-hydration mix. In an hour of warm up, I was already completely soaked with sweat. So I started out really quite down on volume and electrolytes. During my race, I went through 2 whole water bottles that I had actually put on my bike for the criterium, which for me is not normal. I usually only race with 1 water bottle during a criterium. This is a 50-minute race, but it was high intensity and high heat. Even with those 2 water bottles of Roctane during that race, I got to the last lap, third corner of the last lap. My vision just, and I almost blacked out on the bike. I was overheating. I started having an incredibly serious heat emergency. I was seen by medical staff, and was almost actually taken to the ER. I probably should have been taken to the ER, but I'm so stubborn. I fought them on it, and eventually was able to cool down enough to stop vomiting, have my quads stop seizing up, and my blood pressure to come down. I was actually on the border of heat stroke. I actually tore part of my quad because of how strongly my quad muscle was contracting, and really took myself out of training for the next week and a half. It was pretty lousy, and it was entirely preventable. Had I, even if I couldn't get to my water bottle as much as I wanted to in work, I should have pushed the volume more when I could. I should have made sure I finished that 1 water bottle before I went to bed, or even more. And in the morning, I should have had cooperation of my fiance to keep me hydrating during that car ride. Now, that said, it's completely my fault. I'm the athlete, and I'm the one that should have been keeping on top of it. I haven't had a heat emergency like that in quite a long time, and it was a good reminder that even at this point, as completely neurotic as I am about hydration, it can still happen. So I guess the takeaway of this is, experiment with what works, find your own system, but remember, it's about hydrating not just on the day of the event and not just playing catch up, but preparing days in advance, and then hours in advance, and then during the event, and then recovering properly. Okay, I hope this is helpful. It was a bit long, but feel free to throw any questions at me. All right, bye.